All right, here is the last part of DSMA 11. All right, so in math, we have these crazy things called imaginary units or imaginary numbers. They're actually very important. We use them in electrical engineering. You would not have a cell phone if we didn't have this technology with imaginary numbers. So what's going to happen is we know that we can't take, whoops, hold on a second. We know that we cannot take the square root of a negative number, right? We get an error in the calculator. However, we need to be able to do this for certain calculations. And so we call this I, and it is usually a cursive I. Sometimes it looks like an italic I. And so the square root of -1 is equal to I. Now, if we see I squared, that's equal to -1. Now, we're not really going to use that in this class, but if you go on in math, you will definitely use that. And so you're only ever going to see I. You're not going to see I squared because you would simplify it then to -1. When we're looking at imaginary numbers, we are going to write them in a form of what we call a complex number. So we're going to have a plus bi. A is going to be the real part, so the real number. Those are numbers we're used to. And then the second part is going to be the imaginary with the I. The calculator is also going to always write it this way too. And so sometimes your answers in the calculator are going to look a little different from if we just do them as a giant fraction, but they mean exactly the same thing. So I'm going to show you in just a minute how to get your calculator in a mode so that you're able to put these in to the calculator. So here we have the square root of 36, or -36. And so what we actually have here is the square root of 36 times the square root of -1. Well, we know the square root of 36 is 6. It's a perfect square. And now we know that the square root of -1, we're going to write as I. And so we're going to now incorporate this into our work and with the quadratic formula. All right, let's come down here. So again, okay, this is part of the numbering system. We have the square root of -120. Okay, so let's break down 120. That's probably as far as we need to go because all we have is a set of 2's here that we can bring out. Okay, so we can bring us a 2 out. We can, what's left is 30, right? 2 times 15 is left under the radical. Now, depending on what kind of mathematician you are, the I, it technically is supposed to go here, right? At the end. We kind of treat it like a variable where we put all the numbers on the front. And so this is the way that your calculator will give it to you. But for people like me who are an applied mathematician, we worry that the I looks like it's under the radical. And so you'll probably see me write it like this. Neither one's wrong. Neither one's more right than the other, but the calculator is going to show it like that first one. Okay, let's play with our calculator a little bit. All right, so we saw earlier in DSMA 11 that if your calculator is in what we call real mode, then if you try to do the square root of a negative number, you're going to get, that's supposed to be number, you're going to get an error. So we have to change your calculator. What we're going to do is you're going to hit Shift Setup here. So Shift and then Setup, and then you're going to arrow down until you see complex mode here. Okay, most of the time your calculator when you're in complex mode is going to be in real, which we needed for chapter 2. And so when we get back to the final exam, we're going to have to be able to put your calculator back to real. But for now, for chapter 3, we can leave it in complex mode. So complex mode would be F2, right? If you hit F2, it's going to change the screen to A plus BI, where it's going to take care of imaginary units for us. And then if you hit execute, it will save it, that it's going to be in complex mode. So now when you take the square root of a negative number, you're going to get I. So this is the problem we did on the last screen. And we got the same thing, 2 times the square root of 30, all times I. All right, so just remember that so that you can put it back to real when we get later in the chapters here. Okay, let's go ahead and put this one in the quadratic formula. It's all set up for us. We've got, we're in standard form. There's no fractions. So we're going to have A equal 2, B equal -7, and C equal 8. And let's see, I don't know if this is an imaginary one or not. Just more practice. Looks like it might. All right, so we have the negative of b, then we have b squared minus 4 times a times c, and then on the bottom 2 times a. All right, let's clean up inside here. We have 49 minus 64, so that gives me -15. Double check me there. Yeah. Okay, so negative and -7 gives me 7, plus or minus the square root of -15 all over 4. Now 15 does not simplify any further because it's just 3 times 5, but we do need to get that negative out of there. And so if we do that, if we pull the I out, sounds kind of strange, right? We get this answer. Now, if you put this in your calculator, if you use the Casio, you're going to get 7 over 4 plus or minus the square root of 15 over 4i. That is the exact same answer. So it does not matter. That's fine. You can put that in your computer looking just like that. Okay, all it does is separate the real part from the imaginary. So you have the 7 over 4 in the front, you have the plus or minus, and then you have the square root of 15 over 4 all times I. Still a good answer. All right, let's try this one. So it is not in standard form, plus we need to do a little bit of work. I'm going to go ahead and subtract the 11, move it over to the other side, and then I need to go ahead and distribute that x. So we get x times 5x gets us 5x squared, x times 2 is 2x. I have minus 11 because I moved that over, and now I'm going to go ahead and put this into the quadratic formula because it does not factor. Oh my goodness. So this is going to take quite a bit of factoring. If we're doing it, well, not too bad. If we're doing it by hand, let's see what we get. We get 2 times 112. Then we get 2 times 56. 2 times 28. And then finally 2 times 14. All right, so if your Casio is not going to clean this up, if you don't have a Casio, you're going to just start breaking 224 down into all of its prime factors. And in this case, we had a set of 2's here and a set of 2's here. So when we come down here, we can pull 4 out, 2 times 2, but we have that 14 left underneath. We don't have to worry about imaginary because we don't have any negatives under the radical. And then we have 10 on the bottom. Okay, so we took 224, simplified it either with our calculator or looking at our factors, but we're not quite done. All right, this is a good answer, but it's not a great answer. So we need to go ahead, we have to look at the 3 numbers, right? Not the number under the radical. Don't touch under the radical. But we're going to look at the number out front, the number in front of the radical, and the number on the bottom. And if they can all 3 be divisible by one number, we're going to go ahead and do that, and the greatest number. So in this case, we can divide all of those by 2. So we would have -1 plus or minus 2 times the square root of 14. That does not look like a 14, hopefully, all divided by 5. So I divided every single of those 3 circled numbers by 2. I just cleaned them up. And that's it. I'm good. It was not imaginary, but we did have to clean it up a little bit in the beginning. All right, let's try one more here. So this one's in standard form. We are good to go. So we've got -2 plus or minus the square root of 2 squared minus 4 times 1 times 10, all over 2 times a, which is 1. All right, let's see what's under the radical here. We have 4 minus 40, so that gives me a -36. Let me check that. So 2 times 2 gives me 4, minus 4 times 10 would give me -40, and 4 minus 40 would give me -36. All right, so that gives me -2 plus or minus the square root of -36, all divided by 2. So -2 plus or minus. So we know that the square root of 36 is 6, and the square root of -1 is I, all divided by 2. So I can now clean this up, right? Because everything's divisible by 2. So I've got -2 over 2 would give me -1 plus or minus 6 divided by 2 is 3, and then I have to have the I there as well. All right, and so we are done with quadratic formula. So make sure that you have to know the quadratic formula. So look up those songs if you're interested to help you remember it. And then just practice some. I'm sure in YouTube you can look up Casio and quadratic formula, and they can give you some more instructions for putting it into the Casio.